real freedom doesn't mean trying to change the environment of our life. Real freedom means learning to regulate ourselves towards a higher purpose within the midst of that environment. I thought before we begin dissecting this topic, or the way we can begin dissecting this topic, is let's look at what does the word financial independence actually mean. Does anyone ever study the history of words? Anyone have a hobby of studying the history of words? It's a very interesting activity, isn't it? It really reveals why we say the things that we say and the meaning which has been extracted out of it as time has gone on. So, yeah, it really expands the layers of understanding which we have as we go through the world. And it also, if you do it, I think it can expand your vocabulary because you'll find out about other words. So the science or the study of the history of words is known as etymology. It means the history of a word. So this word financial comes from the word finance. And finance comes from the Latin word finis. Anyone known what finis means? Based on just hearing that, what does it sound like? Finesse. Also, financial itself, it tells us a lot about the word. The word final, it comes from the same root of finis. So finis literally means to put something to an end. So to come to an end of something. So financial means to bring obligations to an end. So if everyone who is someone in this world or who claims to be someone in this world, they generally have some type of financial portfolio, which means how have they brought their various obligations to an end? Like you have a credit score, right? Does anyone have a credit score here? Okay, most people have a credit score. If you've rented before, I think you have to have one. I just found out I have one. I don't even have a credit card. This word, financial, means bringing all obligations to an end. So if you have a record of bringing your obligations to an end on time and in a proper way, then institutions have faith in you, they have trust in you, they can entrust you with the various facilities which you're asking them for. So financial means to bring obligations to an end. Now the word independence is even more interesting. It literally means, the root of it means not hanging from another. So it means you're not hanging on anything. Depend means to hang on something. Independ means to not hang on anything. So financial independence means not to rely on others for support. Right? Not to rely on bringing our obligations to an end from others. So it's a very interesting concept, right? Financial independence. It means that we're practically free in bringing our circumstances to an end. It's a very interesting meaning. So why do you think people would be interested in having financial independence? Why would we be interested in having financial independence and then by having that being able to retire early? Can anyone offer something? I need some reciprocation. Yes.
I guess to basically not have to be obligated to work.
Yeah.
In favor of owing anyone.
Yeah.
Your time or your
Yeah. That's great. Not have to work for a bad boss, right? Who's had a bad boss before? Yeah, those suck. Yeah. You.
I think the reason for me would be to pursue what I really enjoy.
Yeah.
Not having to do things which I don't enjoy.
Yeah, why slave away at the rat race when you can be like, scaling the Grand Canyon or something, right? Sounds like so much more fun.
So we could prevent beggars from coming about, pretty much. So once I would say, like, if we're all financially independent, it would keep the world balanced in such a way where we don't have to keep relying on other people, and it'd be less beggars.
Yeah.
Be more clear mind. There'll be less negativity.
We could potentially be in a position to help others more
That
readily, financially. Yeah. Okay, one more. We would not work for money. I like that. So then the question is, what would we be working for, right? For something deeper. Yeah, we would want to pursue a life of greater meaning, right? So this is kind of going in the direction of what I want to speak about. And I want to talk about the limitations of focusing exclusively on financial independence. Because although we may remove external dependence by, organizing our bank account in a particular way, investing at a particular time, living very frugally. These are all the principles of this FIRE movement. You invest at the right time, you live very frugally, you adjust your circumstance just right so that by a particular period of time in your life, you'll have more facility to be able to do the things that you want to do. It requires a lot of sacrifice initially for a great gain in the future. But let's say someone actually achieves that. Let's say someone actually achieves that financial independence. And as you were bringing up, we're no longer working for money, so then the question becomes, what do we work for? So even if we get financial independence, that may give us freedom on the external plane of our life, in terms of where we live, where we travel, how much food we have. But that's only dealing with one aspect of ourselves, actually. Probably you've heard this before, but Jim Carrey, he once said that, I hope everyone becomes rich and famous so that they can realize that happiness does not exist there. Has anyone heard this quote before? It's a very profound quote. He's one of the most successful actors of 21st century, potentially. And definitely the most successful comedian. And he's making the claim that even if you have all that facility, there's no happiness with all that facility. People who win the lottery, many of them, it's reported that they just go completely insane because they have all this money and they don't know what to do with it. They finally have that financial independence, but they don't know how to do with it. And furthermore, even if we become financially independent, we're still going to have obligations internally. So the Bhagavad Gita speaks about our internal obligations which we have, which come through the force of nature, is that we could be obliged to seeking the desire for recognition. We could be obliged to anger as it arises. We could be obliged to the various forces of our senses in terms of lust, greed, fear. So even though we become free externally, internally we're still very much bounded. So there is a very interesting book which was written by a sociologist named Erich Fromm. It's a book called Escape from Freedom. Has anyone heard of it before? Oh, you've read it before. Okay. And who else has read it before? I saw a hand over here. Or just one person. Okay. So Escape from Freedom is a very interesting book. It talks about, he makes the observation that societies who've undergone revolutions and societies which have flip the switch on their social structure to supposedly get more freedom socially, more freedom politically, many of those systems, they revert back to an authoritarian style of government, or they go into an automation mode by which they're willing to subscribe to the ideas of a single leader. So many people, even if they are given freedom, without learning to find freedom internally, we're still bounded by something, actually. And because we're bound internally, even though we're supposedly free, it's just it's setting the stage for us to be bound externally in the future because we don't know what to do with the freedom which has been bequeathed upon us. So Erich Fromm makes the point that without being able to understand a higher value in life, a higher purpose in life, then we can't actually be free. Because our internal pushing will force us to be bound again. Because we become fearful once we have that freedom, because we don't know what to do with it actually. So I would like to propose that we reframe what freedom is. Now, I'm not speaking against financial freedom. I'm just saying if we are going to move in that direction in our life, we should be able to understand what actual freedom is. Freedom is not external, but it's internal. And we have to learn that the whole idea of trying to develop financial independence, it comes from this idea of trying to control the environment of this world around us. But real freedom doesn't mean trying to change the environment of our life. Real freedom means learning to regulate ourselves towards a higher purpose within the midst of that environment. So therefore, we have to understand the essential nature of who we are. Like she put out, we will no longer have to work for money if we become financially independent. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what do we have to work for? So the teachings of Bhagavad Gita teach that the essential function of who we are is to be of service. And real freedom isn't asking the question whether we get to work or not, but it's choosing what is that which is worth serving in an uninterrupted, in unmotivated way. Like for instance, if you go to your work tomorrow, does anyone have a job here? Okay, most people have a job here, good. Who wants to answer this question for me? If you go to your job tomorrow and your boss says, I really like having you around, you do a really good job working, but I'm not going to pay you anymore. How many of you will continue to work for your job? You will. Great. I like that. Most people in the room did not raise their hand. Because our work actually isn't unmotivated. Because the satisfaction which we get from it is not deep enough. It's not substantial enough in order for us to stay within it without there being some remuneration. So the definition of freedom is to find that which is worth serving, that despite circumstances, despite scarcity of resources, despite personal inconvenience, and despite unforeseen obstacles, that object of service is worth continuing on serving because of the joy which we get from selflessly offering ourselves to that object of service. So the Vedanta Sutra, which is an ancient text, wisdom text of India, explains Atato Brahma Jignasya. Now is the time to seek out that object of service. Now is the time to seek out that which is worth serving despite the limitations of circumstances and despite the limitations of resources, which means that even if I'm in the most forlorn position of my life, that service will never stop. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is another wisdom text, it explains, Yeyat mam supersediti. That service towards that object of service, which is worth serving in any and all circumstances, despite personal inconvenience. That service which is unmotivated and uninterrupted can fully satisfy the self. And that is actual freedom. To be willing to serve despite circumstances. To be willing to go on offering love despite circumstances. So the willingness to search out that object of service, the willingness to be deep enough to see what is it that is actually worth serving in this life? What is it that I can go on serving and feel fully nourished and fully satisfied by without any oscillation of happiness and distress? That is the purpose of the human form of life. And that is what's defined as actual freedom, is to be willing to seek that out despite what society thinks, to seek that out despite what we may think, but to be sincere enough to seek out that object of service. So, the real problem in life isn't whether we have enough financial resources. It's not whether we can work in Montana on a laptop for 2 hours a day and have time to go rock climbing in the afternoon. The real problem in life is we fundamentally do not understand who we intrinsically are. And this is the first teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. Is that as long as you try to find satisfaction, as long as you try to find an adjustment on the platform of this temporary body, which is relating with this temporary environment, you can never actually be satisfied. No matter how much resources you have, no matter how much prestige you have, no matter how much influence you have, if you have not been able to understand who you essentially are beyond the body which is changing, and find satisfaction in that reality, find happiness in that reality, find purpose in that reality, then no matter how much you try to adjust your environment, it's still going to bring you distress. It's still going to bring you dissatisfaction. So one of the best ways that we can begin to search out this object of service is through the process of mantra meditation, actually. Because it's a sound vibration which directly connects us to who we foundationally are. And the layers of misunderstanding, the layers of misidentification, the layers of distraction which bind us to this facade of a personality which we are trying to convince everyone in this world that we are, and trying to convince ourselves of who we are, all those things are cleared away. It's just like if you have rain. When rain falls from the sky and it lands in mud, it loses its essential translucent nature. But when you filter that water, it develops the same original quality that it had without the mud which is mixed in it. So the various identities and layers and mass which we try to convince ourselves of, all of those things are gradually removed through the chanting. And simultaneously, we begin to get an indication of what is the ultimate object of service. We begin to see that the original source of who we are spiritually, the original source of who we are consciously, that is non-different from the vibration in the mantra. And when we come in contact with that mantra, we feel a deep sense of home, a deep sense of comfort, and a deep sense of purpose and gratification, which cannot come from any sensual, mental, or intellectual adjustment. So this isn't to bash financial freedom, but it's just to say that if we actually want to retire early, what we are actually wanting to retire from is not work. What we want to retire from is our ego. And we should retire from that as soon as we possibly can. And that is actual freedom. So I'll just stop there. And I would be very grateful if we can open it up for discussion and just hear from everyone if they had anything